but continuing the conversation about culture change and public engagement. It's one of the 4 levers that every year at the forum we focus on: investment, public engagement and communications, energy, food and farm, all 4 years. And now our 5th, we focus on these 4 topics. And Geof Rochester is our host of this next session. Geof is the founder of Geof Rochester Consulting. He advises corporations, nonprofits, individuals, organizations on corporate sustainability, NGO management, philanthropy, and social entrepreneurship. He's a recognized thought leader. He, before this, was managing director and chief marketing officer at the Nature Conservancy globally. Before that, he was executive vice president for marketing at World Wrestling Entertainment. So you talk about how do we engage the public. This guy knows some stuff. And he was also senior vice president for marketing at Showtime. So Geof is here to host a fantastic panel of friends who have effectively shown how do we storytell for impact. Please join me in welcoming Geof Rochester and the rest of the group. Thank you.
Is there a clicker? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. This is going to be fun. This is going to be informative, and it's a very important conversation. So my panelists are getting settled. I love this conference. This is my 3rd year. I love Amy and the work she does. I love the curation. Friend of Amy. Okay, I'm going to take about 5 minutes to set this up, and then we'll jump into the panel. Here's my clicker. And really, there are 3 key messages I want to deliver to you before we get into the panel. The first thing is that I think we have too narrow a definition of storytelling. This is what we typically think of when we think of purpose-driven storytelling. Michael Moore, documentaries, DiCaprio, Netflix, those kinds of things. The second core message is that I predict you will see an explosion of the kind of great advertising you just saw with HP. Brands are really leaning in 2018, 2019, 2020. And the third message is that we have to go broad, right? The sector's been too small. So let me show you exactly what I mean. I give a speech a lot talking about the role of marketing in the age of corporate courage. So when GE comes out on climate, when Salesforce comes out on DACA, when Nike makes the bold decision to go with Colin Kaepernick, that's corporate courage. And if you're the CMO, the brand has moved from static to dynamic, so what do? How does that reflect it in your marketing? So the obvious prediction is purpose has now become the 5th P in marketing. It's ubiquitous, and I know there's an issue about greenwashing and the sincerity and the authenticity of these efforts, but make no mistake, we're not going back. That's because of pressure from millennial customers and employees. So I love this slide with regards to the numbers. This is the top 5 brands in the world, the top 5 marketing companies in the world, spend $45.5 billion in media. Procter alone spends $10.5. What happens when this sector, these consumer brands, start to get into purpose and storytelling? So an example, what's really going on is Unilever used to be viewed as the world's most purpose-driven company. Paul Pullman has stepped down. Procter wants to supplant Unilever as the world's most purpose-driven company. Again, you can argue the authenticity, but that is the intent. And that's being driven by their chief marketing officer, a guy by the name of Mark Pritchard. I was on a panel with him recently. Mark is the CMO of Procter. More importantly, he's the chairman of ANA. There are 2 big organizations that convene marketers in this country. There's the American Marketing Association, AMA, and then there's ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. Mark is the chairman, and he's on a mission to get brands to do more social purpose engagement and communication. So what have we seen over the past couple of years? When there was an issue of protecting national lands and public parks, the Apparel Coalition came together, brands like REI, et cetera. This one I love. I've met with the Super Bowl is in Miami in 2020. The chairman and the president of the Super Bowl, which is in Miami, the host committee, have decided they want to make this an homage, an engagement around sea level rise and climate. They want to use that platform, sports, to tell the story. And the sub-branding is called From the Oceans to the Everglades. And if you look at any Olympic bid now, they're having this conversation. Not only are they talking about greening the activity, how do they use the Tokyo Olympics, the platform, to do storytelling? Travel, Palau came out with the tourism pledge. So when you fly to Palau now, they get you to take a pledge to leave the community pristine. These are all teaching moments, is my point. This is not a film, it's not a TV show, but it's a teaching moment, it's storytelling. Music, how many of you have heard of Global Citizen, the Global Citizen Festival? Not that many, okay. So there's a group called Global Citizen. They position themselves as the leader in engaging youth around the world in social purpose. And their iconic event is an annual concert in New York, and they mobilize artists to talk about social change and social purpose. Then you have the disruptors. WeWork, 6,000 employees have said they will not reimburse for any meat meals. And then, of course, Lyft has depositioned Uber as a more socially purposed brand. I get emails from Lyft about gender equality and issues like that. They're using their platform to tell stories and educate and inspire. And then I think a lot about education. This is Discovery Education. It's Discovery's for-profit business unit. They have a database of 4.5 million teachers worldwide. So if you want to educate, inspire a student via teacher, that's a platform for you. So for me, these are all forms of storytelling. So I wake up literally every day thinking about this question. If I had a marginal $5 or $10 million, if you wanted to educate the world, inspire the world, tell stories, what's the best platform? And of course, there's gaming, and people underestimate the power of gaming. So WWF partnered with Zynga, I think, years ago to use that platform to do storytelling. And then finally, this is something that when I went to the Nature Conservancy in 2010, I found shocking. The environmental movement is last. The environmental movement is last in philanthropic giving in this country. The pie is about $390, $400 billion. The environmental movement plus animals gets 3%. And I think that's a failure of storytelling, communication, engagement. We've made this conversation a narrowcast, not a mass market thing. So with that, I will get into the panel. And these are the panelists and their hashtags, et cetera. So if you want to communicate or get a hold of them, that's their information. So.
That was quick.
Good idea, right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, everybody got it? So this is going to be fun, this is going to be interesting, this is going to be informative. Okay. Ready?
All set.
Cool. All right. So this is a very esteemed, very committed panel of people. I'm really proud. Thank you, Amy, for giving me the chance to lead this conversation. So first up, we have Christi Cooper. She's director of Youth versus Gov, produced by Barrelmaker. So this is the documentary that we've talked about that features the 21 young people who are suing the government. So we'll hear more about that in a minute. She's an Emmy Award-winning cinematographer with a PhD in neuroscience. So please welcome Christi. Next up, we've got Peter Horton. He's a writer, director, producer, and actor who starred in 30-something. So many of you may know him from 30-something.
You have to be old.
How was you? I love that show.
You can be not 30-something.
Then he went on to write, direct, and produce television shows like Grey's Anatomy, where he not only directed the pilot, but he received an Emmy nomination and 2 Directors Guild nominations. His latest project is New Amsterdam, big TV show on NBC. And so we'll hear more from him in a minute. Then we have Luis Psihoyos, who you've seen a lot of. And he's a filmmaker, executive producer of Oceanic Preservation Society.
Never enough.
He is widely regarded as one of the world's most prominent still photographers and now directs films with the intention of inspiring social impact. He's best known for The Cove, which became the first documentary in history to sweep all the film guilds and won over 100 awards globally. Including the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. He also has produced Racing Extinction, which I saw in New York, which is tremendous. And as you've seen, he's now working on The Game Changers. So welcome, Louis. And then finally, final guest is Sarah Finn Robinson, who is the founding director of the 51% Project, a climate communications initiative at Boston University's Institute for Sustainable Energy, where she's a senior fellow. She's also the founding partner of WeSpire. Check it out, if Google WeSpire if you're not familiar with it. It's very important. Platform for Fortune 500 corporate sustainability. So now, to the first guest. Thank you. Sorry, it's a little hot up here. So for the first guest, for Christi, we wanted to talk about why are you doing the doc in the first place, Youth versus Gov? and talk about your perception, your views on the role of youth today, especially today.
Well, I first wanted to ask the audience, do you think that you have a constitutional right to live in a world safe from climate catastrophe? Yes. Good. For some reason, this simple yet revolutionary question is being asked by these 21 youth in our federal courts today. Do I have a clicker?
Oh, sorry.
So this little boy in the middle is Levi. He's 11 years old and is from Florida. He lives on a barrier island just off the coast of Florida, and his home is threatened by sea level rise. In 2015, 21 youth from across the country filed a historic constitutional climate change lawsuit against the US government over their constitutional rights to a safe climate. This case is the first time that our constitutional rights to a safe climate have ever been argued in our courts. The premise of this legal argument is simple, but also groundbreaking. It rests first and foremost on the constitutional claim that every individual should be free from government harm, from government actions that would harm life, liberty, and property. Critical to these rights, which we've also heard about today, is the health of our oceans as well as our atmosphere. An important piece of what the youth are doing in the court is the evidence that they are bringing in this case. They have evidence showing that the federal government has been more than an innocent bystander in this crisis. For over 60 years, our government has not only known that fossil fuel emissions are causing this climate crisis, but each and every president from both parties have instead chosen to subsidize and promote a fossil fuel-based national energy system, prioritizing corporate profit over human rights. Through these affirmative actions, which I would like to emphasize that these are affirmative actions that the government is taking, our government is denying these youth and future generations the same rights that previous generations had. To make matters worse, these plaintiffs are considered a minority, many with no voting rights and little political power, yet they will bear the impacts of climate change the most heavily. And the final leg of their case reasons that the atmosphere is no different than our shorelines, our waterways, or our public lands, all of which the US government is legally bound to protect from pollution and misuse under the public trust doctrine. The plaintiffs and their legal team have gone even a step further and are demanding that the US government stop issuing all new fossil fuel leases on public lands immediately. So I'd like to share, this is Kelsey and Vic, who you guys have already been meeting this week. I'd like to share a little trailer of the film that we've been working on. Do I have to hit it again?
You have just seen the Constitution in action.
If y'all just witnessed something amazing, I want you to say, yeah!
The government's actions to worsen climate change are inconsistent with our most deeply held moral values.
The United States federal government and the biggest coalition of fossil fuels in the world just sat feet away from me and tried to deny their responsibility for climate change.
The government lawyers said that we should have filed this case 60 years ago.
Everything that our politicians are too greedy, corrupt, afraid to do, that is what we're doing. We're out of options, we're out of time, fingers to point and people to blame. Like, that's gone.
What do we want? Climate justice! What do we want it now?
I love what this country stands for. The ideas that the founders put in the Constitution, the rights of free speech, religious liberty, the rights to life, liberty, and property, the government is in place to protect those.
You have a group of children plaintiffs coming to the courts and saying climate crisis needs to be addressed by this branch of government.
We have evidence going back to the 50s that both government and the fossil fuel industry knew that if they continued to burn fossil fuels, that it would cause catastrophic impacts.
Politicians think it's okay to take money from lobbyists, and they influence both parties.
President Obama knows better. Why is he doing this?
Every action that Trump takes to dismantle laws to mitigate fossil fuel extraction, that is evidence in our lawsuit that our government is failing to represent us.
These defendants are going to have to look these kids in the eye And having these kids say, what have you done to make sure that the nation I inherit is not going to be destroyed?
I shouldn't be sleeping or eating because that's a moment not spent working on this.
Am I sacrificing my life? This is a life that I want to live.
Racism has a lot to do with climate change, and I'm trying to bring justice to my people of the Marshall Islands.
I'm not gonna stop doing what I think is right, and I'm not gonna stop doing what I love just because ignorant people want to do ignorant things. So
it's a heavy burden that they're carrying just to be so visible and out front as plaintiffs in this big case against the President of the United States. It's big.
You can't drink oil. Keep it in the soil.
This might be one of the best chances that we've got.
You guys are going to full trial.
Yes! This is our last hope. This is our greatest hope. And we're gonna win.
When our trial starts, it will be the moment when climate science will finally get its day in court.
This legal system that we've had for 200 years might just prevent a catastrophic, irrevocable disaster that will be visited on these youth.
We are at a tipping point right now where we will either be remembered as the generation that destroyed the planet, as a generation that put profits before future, or as a generation that united to address the greatest issue of our time.
We want climate justice.
And we want it
now.
Obviously, the trailer needs to be updated. The trial was supposed to start last fall, and the government filed a petition for writ of mandamus with the Supreme Court, thereby delaying the case. But this case needs to go to trial. These 21 young Americans will then be able to ask our federal courts to decide, was our government promoting fossil fuels, or were they doing everything that they could to stop the climate change crisis? Because as Julia Olson, the lead attorney, says on the case, if it's as bad as we think it is and all the evidence we have indicates, it's the biggest crime against humanity ever, and it's a constitutional violation by any standard.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as I said in my opening remarks, this conversation about social purpose and storytelling tends to be dominated by docs. So Peter, you're the features guy. So could you talk about your perspective on features and their role? And are you doing anything different now with New Amsterdam versus Grey's Anatomy?
Boy, this is a subject I've wrestled with for most of my career. I mean, are we doing in the fictional space, because obviously in the documentary space, the results are much more measurable, and are we in the fictional space really making a real impact? And I guess the short answer is a resounding maybe. Maybe even a probably. I'll even go that far. So I'll try and make my case to you. I grew up in a time of stakes. It was during the assassinations of the 60s, the Vietnam War, Watergate, civil rights. I mean, it was a time of tension, and you could feel it in the culture. And our storytelling was intimately braided in with that tension. And you could feel that too. And I remember the first time I really experienced that. I was a young boy in a theater watching Easy Rider, which is a movie I'm sure most of you never even heard of. Because it's a kind of it doesn't time out well. It's basically a movie about Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda riding motorcycles as hippies through the bigoted South, right? And at one point, at the end of the film, they both get shot, of course, by a farmer in a pickup truck. And the last image of the movie is Peter Fonda's motorcycle, complete with American flag gas tank, then flying off riderless into a cornfield. And then this screen goes to black, and there's this moment of just intense silence. And someone stands up in the theater and sarcastically says, "God bless America." And the response to the theater was silent again, but in support of it, and you can feel the tension. And that's when I thought, I want to do that. You know, that's what I want. I want to have a voice like that. But the problem is, by the time I was ready to kind of join that space, everything had changed. You know, the stakes had dropped down. Sort of the greed is good generation had started. And movies like Jaws and Star Wars and Disco had come along, and everybody suddenly knew how much money they could make off of storytelling. And so us storytellers were suddenly mandated to be entertainers, and entertainers alone. There was very little interest in anything that had, you know, social impact. But that's why I was there, and that's why a lot of us were there. And so we kind of forged on. And I remember in 30-something, which is a series I was an actor and a director in, right around 1990, we did the very first scene in television that had two gay men in bed together. And ABC did not want us to do that. In fact, in the original script, they actually kissed on screen. And this one conversation we had with an executive at ABC, he said, there will never be two men kissing on ABC, period. It slammed the phone down. Wow. But we did it anyway. And kind of throughout those decades, I would try and do projects like that. I did a thing called American Odyssey about power in a democracy. Do we still have power in a democracy? Or another project that was a sort of an assault on shock jock daytime television shows. And every time you'd put something out like that, it just kind of went out. And I never really knew if it had any impact. But then suddenly two things changed. The first was gay marriage became legal. And I suddenly thought to myself, you know what? My industry did something good here. We found a way to take what has been marginalized and normalize it. Bring gay characters into our stories, into people's living rooms, as if that's natural. We even got to the point where, you know, we'd have a gay character without having to have a story about a gay character. And then the second thing that happened was Trump got elected. And suddenly we're in a time of stakes again. And so us storytellers are having to really step up again. And not only that, we're being allowed to step up again. When I did Grey's Anatomy, which is a hospital show, which for those of you who don't know, it's basically a hospital show about who's in love with who and who's having sex with who and who's in love with who and who's having sex with who. I'm doing a show now called New Amsterdam. And New Amsterdam is a, just to say it briefly, we can get to the clip. My writing partner and I found a way to do a hospital show that's about social issues. Every single episode is either about climate change, gun control, healthcare in America. And not only did we pitch that, NBC bought it, and it became a hit for them. So times are changing a bit. I'd like to set up a quick clip just to give you a sense of what it feels like now in the fictional world in terms of these issues. This is a scene about a mother or a woman whose nephew had just been shot by a police officer. And our head of psychiatry had come down to try and comfort her. And she's waiting to find out if he's okay or not.
Oops, I forgot to go through all my slides.
You got another slide. You got a couple more slides. Oh, there I am. See if oh, here we go.
Ms. Dukes, can you tell me about Malik? Rhonda.
What? Why are you still talking?
I'm just trying to learn more about Malik's home support system.
He's not some charity case.
I don't know, I didn't mean to imply it.
Malik has been well loved and extremely well cared for. Is that what you need to hear?
It's good.
Church choir, after school care, year-round sports. I've done everything in my power to keep him safe, to keep him from dying like his parents. This foolishness still found him.
I'm genuinely just here trying to help.
If you really want to help, then stop the police from shooting black boys trying to get to school on time. And get every bullet out of this city. So my nephew has a chance of seeing his 21st birthday. Can you do that, Mr. Trauma Support Man?
So I have one last piece of evidence to read you quickly. because I know time is limited. This is a tweet we got in one of our fan sites. I don't know where. This is how it goes. Scene. This is a mother writing about her son. She writes, scene. Me binge watching NBC New Amsterdam in the living room after the kids are asleep. Isaiah walks into the room during an episode where the black male cardiologist, played by Jocko Sims, has a chest cracked open and his hands are around a beating heart. I pause the TV. Hey, buddy, can't sleep? Isaiah, rubbing his eyes, his jaw drops. What are you watching? Oh, that's a heart doctor saving someone's life. Isaiah, oh. Turns around, goes back to bed. Several days later, scene. In the car on the way to daycare, Isaiah, Mommy? Yes, baby. When I'm bigger, I can be a heart doctor. Me, yes. Why do you want to be a heart doctor? So I can save lives like the TV. Me, remembering the other night, oh yes, that's right. Isaiah, that heart doctor looks like me when I'm bigger. Me, yes, baby. Yes, he does. So maybe we are making a difference.
So now over to Louis, and you are, you've obviously displayed great expertise in docs, not features. Could you talk about why you think docs are such a powerful medium? And specifically also, you know, we don't talk a lot about, consumers don't, professionals do, but consumers don't talk about distribution, power, the role of financing to enable you to do what you want to do. So why don't you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's you know, probably one of the most complicated pieces is getting the funding for a project like that, because you know, you go to, I imagine, the networks, and they, you know, they're selling advertising against it. Investors come to us and say, we want to support it, and I say, well, you're better off going to Vegas if you want returns. You know, we had Racing Extinction was the most expensive film, or the most to be paid for documentary at that time to come out of Sundance in the last 5 years, but we made 37 cents on the dollar. So I tell investors, if you want to make money on a project, go to Vegas. Yeah, your chances are better. But if you want to change the world, come to us. So everybody that we get involved with, we have that conversation with, that we're in the business of social change. The Game Changers is a, you know, it's a really, you saw clips from it, but that's a really powerful film. Netflix wanted it. We were in negotiations for like almost over a year. And they offered us a good amount, you know, I'll tell you because I'm not under an NDA. It's like $3 million for that film, which is a good price for a doc. And we turned it down. We're taking less than 1/10 of that. So it's not an original. Original means that it's on Netflix and that's all it's ever going to be on. And that's, you know, for most documentary filmmakers, that's a score. That's a big, huge win. But that means that film will never be in China because Netflix isn't in China. They have a little bit in the Middle East. It'll never be big in the Middle East. And you know, we have Jackie Chan that can as an executive director, so we can get it out in China. We're impact driven. That's the first. You know, that's our only concern. Getting return back from the investors is important because nobody's going to get their money back. You know, we've resigned ourselves to that. So it's a different conversation, and I'm really comfortable with that now because we can point to our successes and say, you know, we've done it before. And so all the projects we take on are all, you know, telling stories. We're doing one on female big wave surfers. For the first time, they have parity in the sport of big wave surfing. And it's really a film about women's empowerment, but against the backdrop of big wave surfing. We do one on the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, our best friends. It's based on the Book of Joy, of how do you find joy in a world of sorrow, because we're trying to fix humanity through films, and it does work. I mean, Norman Lear does some great work, you know, testing exactly what you know, the stuff that you do. They'll do a project on network television and then measure it afterwards. So, I mean,
I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, they do great work. I could hook you up with them.
That'd be great.
They're big supporters of our work. But yeah, so it's, you know, it's a social impact, and so you have to. The conversation has to be, you know, with people that have the money to lose. So I'd say 90% of our projects are family foundations that you know we go to. We we go to them targeting that, these are people that are we're in the same space, see if we can try to come to some, sort of agreement. And after you've done it once, it's easier to do it again. So we can go back to Family Foundation and say, well, we got this other project that might be good for you.
Great, thank you. And then Sarah, you more than anyone studies this, studies the communication, studies the science of communication. Can you talk a bit about 51% Project and what you learned from that?
Absolutely. Do I need the clicker?
Oh, I think you do.
So my question is, why does all this have to be so hard? I'm really impatient with this conversation, even among my family and friends, people who I love and adore and respect and enjoy. I can shut down a family dinner party like that. So I just got really, talk about the last straw, fed up with this. And a year ago, I decided there must be a better way to have this conversation. Certainly, I'm not being very effective here. So I decided to research it. And I discovered a treasure trove of largely unknown scientific research, published papers, peer-reviewed excellence that is really unknown to you people, I think. And so I set out to make it available and to figure out who are the rock stars in the scholarly community that really studies climate change communications. And by the way, if you go to Google Scholar and you enter the 3 words climate change communications, last time I did this, it was over 5 million results. So rather than wade through all 5 million results myself, and these are dense papers with footnotes in like 4-point font, and by the way, they have this thing called abstracts that the professors put together, and even that is completely incomprehensible. So I decided the only way to really figure out what's going on here is to figure out which ones of these papers are most interesting and efficacious and have the best principles that we can bring to light and hopefully make their way into mainstream communications of every sort. But also figure out, so what are the principles exactly that they are identifying? So I am on that track, and I launched this in October 2018, so it's about as old as a 9-month-old baby, I guess. And at the time that I launched it, the demographers who I work with at Yale, and you may have heard of this, I think we've mentioned it here over the past few days, the Yale program on climate change communication, they're just second to none, really. And they also work with George Mason University, which is often left off somehow because Yale has got this cachet. So it's the 2 of them working together that are so awesome. At the time, they released a data set, and this is a long-term study of Americans' attitudes toward global warming. You may have heard of the 6 Americas. So they've sort of sliced and diced the American population into 6 different buckets. And as you might suspect, you've got the deniers at one end, and the hair on fire at the other end. And the 2 categories over here that I'm focused on, and I'm focused on them because these are the people who are already concerned or alarmed about climate change. Because I figure, there are lots of other people worried about all these, deniers and so on, and I'm sick and tired. I obviously am not effective at changing their minds. So I'd rather work with the people who are already engaged. And it's almost 200 million people in this country, so I figured, well, that's enough to work with for now. At the time, the concerned plus the alarmed equaled 51%. And as an English major, I just love that number because it kind of quivers with possibility. The data set was then released again in December, just 9 months ago, or maybe less. And the number had jumped to 59%. So each one of those categories had added an 8%. And I can do the math on a whiteboard later. But that's exciting, so it's moving in the right direction. The public is concerned, but the big problem is that we aren't talking about it. There is a great deal of silence and awkwardness and ill at ease around this conversation. So I have identified 3 principles that I wanted to share with you today, and I think I'm going to skip my slides because that'll just take more time than we have. So I'll tell you the first one is called the consensus. The scientific consensus is 98% that, yes, global warming is happening and that humans caused it. And this one fact can be extremely effective across party lines. When people know this, it's like, okay, so 97 or 98% of doctors say if you continue on with this lifestyle, you're going to get a stroke and die. You might change your behavior. The second one is called the trusted messenger. This is not rocket science. This is when someone who you love and respect and admire, who you get your advice from, your family, your friends, people you work with, people who you think are your rock stars, when they give a message, you're then likely to be influenced. So that's great. The third one is the use of humor. We could use a little bit of light touch here on this subject. We just are going to drown in our despair here. So what I did is recently I worked with a couple of research scientists at the University of Colorado in Boulder who have made it their life's work to study humor specifically around this topic of climate change. And I just put together, and I wish I had all day to show you the playlist that we put together of great examples. I'm not suggesting that everyone start out with a blank piece of paper and try to make up some jokes, because very few of us can do that well. But why not have a look at this playlist, see if you like something, and then use it the next time you're communicating with people. See if you can get people on the same page that way. By the way, I checked. This morning we learned that it was going to be, I think, 107 degrees Fahrenheit in Paris, but guess what? It hit 42.6 Celsius, which is 108.6 Fahrenheit in Paris, France. That's almost 190 degrees. 9 degrees. That's without the dew point. I'm going to end right there. Thank you.
Thank you. So on this topic of targeting an audience, and this is a question for the 3 of you, when you're architecting these storylines, when you're thinking about youth versus gov, are you thinking about how to make the content appealing, or do you know who's on the other side of the issue, and how do you convince them? Same thing with you, Louis, and Peter, you and I talked about your writer's room and some things you're doing there. So could you all kind of extrapolate from her point about bridging the divide and how you're all attacking that?
Well, I think I have a really useful tool in that I'm working with youth. That's made definitely my storytelling a lot easier, because these youth are super engaging, as you all have come to know. But in particular with this story, we're really trying to not politicize it and to move away from this political divide that we have in our country, and really make the conversation about government responsibility and constitutional rights what our government has known for generations, and what they haven't done about it, rather than it being a discussion about us versus them, or Democrats versus Republicans, or anything like that. That we are a collective unit that needs to pull together in order for our species to survive. And so I think if we take away that politicizing and that maybe even shaming towards other people, then I think we can try to work together and collectively force our government to create systemic change.
And Louis, for you, when you did The Cove and Racing to Extinction, did you, the way that it was architected, the way you thought about promotion, the way you thought about distribution, were you thinking about who's on the other side of the issue and how do I create a bridge?
Yeah, all the time, especially with Racing Extinction, and in particular the Game Changers. The Game Changers, if you didn't see the clip, it's about plant-based super athletes, and we're looking at what's the single biggest thing that a person can do to change the world, change climate, and we looked at diet, but aiming towards a vegetarian or a vegan diet, the science shows, the paper shows that only about 7% of the population would change based on the environment. And so we looked at what will make them change, and it is exactly what you said. So we used aspirational people, aspirational athletes, because it's really it's the men that even though it's still traditionally women will go to the grocery store and buy and cook the food, a guy will say, well, where's the meat? And then the conversation gets shut down. So we had to break through. The science shows until you disprove that it's not normal, necessary, or natural to eat meat, people will still come back to that. So we reverse engineered people's psychology to make a film that addressed that. And it's really effective. I mean, the exit polls that we have. I mean, just anecdotally, we showed the film in Dallas, Texas. We did our surveys in places where people wouldn't normally adopt this diet, and about 95% of the people exiting said that they would adopt more of a plant-based diet. Now we have to do the follow-ups to it, but
that's great. I have some researchers who would be really interested in maybe doing some of that work for you.
No, it's because, listen, the average person eats about in America between 10,000 and 16,000 animals in their lifetime. So if you want to save animals, it's perfect. A vegan will save 3.5 tons of carbon dioxide, 9,000 square feet of natural area that doesn't have to be, for food grown to eat animals, 400,000 gallons a year. The list goes on. I mean, so no matter where you want to take it, in healthcare, I talked about this yesterday, it's like, 85% of our chronic diseases are reversible or preventable. So it's a win-win-win across the line. So it's not like a film about climate change, but it's a film about healing the planet, healing everybody. But we did reverse engineer. We looked at the science and said, we don't want to make another film that makes us feel good, that isn't effective. Exactly. And when you target a film as well as I think we did, it's going to have results that are going to be like, you'll compound it across the across the culture.
I'm going to call an audible. Is there a handheld mic around? Do you guys have any questions? Because this is such an extraordinary group. I want to open it up to some Q&A in about 2 minutes. And then, Peter, how I don't know if you're willing to share, but the conversation you and I had about your writers and where you're going.
I had an experience when we were screening New Amsterdam last year at the beginning of the season, where after the screening, a middle-aged white man in a wheelchair came up to me and pleaded with me to tell his stories as well, not just Hollywood stories. He was a red state person. And the scary part about that was I didn't really know what he meant. Our writer's room is pretty blue. And all of our issues, as you can see, tend to go towards issues that I think most people in this room tend to embrace. And so we've been challenging ourselves. How do we go about really understanding the other side rather than just judging it and telling stories that have judgment in it? And so we're starting at what we're calling a listening tour this year, where we're going to go up to, the first one is in Albany, New York, a red state part of
Albany.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Can't help
You can see how well I'm going to do up there. I'll be listening.
Do a little prep.
Yes, Albany. To basically say to the audience, because we're going to screen an episode and say, what are the stories that we're not telling? You tell us what we're missing. To try and bridge a gap, because I really feel like the only way, certainly from an entertainment standpoint, that we're going to find a way to speak to each other is if we listen to each other, if we lean in. It's like Brené Brown says something like it's really hard to hate someone from a distance, so lean in. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, no. My personal perspective on this is too much.
Oh, it was the opposite. I'm sorry. It's really hard to hate someone up close.
If you say.
It's easy to hate someone from a distance. Hard to hate up close. So lean in. Thank you. Thank you for the laugh, whoever it was.
Yeah, Christi, do you think too much of the content in this space is preaching to the choir based on what you've seen?
Me?
Yeah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Or did you mean to
talk
to Christi?
Sarah,
Okay. We are in an echo chamber, but I think there are great advantages to being in an echo chamber because each one of us is going to leave this place after the hoedown tonight and the rafting tomorrow and think, so I hope everyone's going to dig deep and think, what more can I be doing? Each and every one of us can be doing more. Absolutely we can. And so we need to go, into a quiet space and think about that. Does that answer your...
Yeah. So any questions? We've got about 5 or 6 minutes. Yeah. I can't see, but.
Netflix is looking at removing smoking in a lot of their shows, just because it shows that a lot of people start smoking after viewing it in the media. But what can be done in a similar avenue that way, or what is being done, but with regards to climate change and how we relate to what we consume?
Wow. Are you looking at me?
Yeah.
Let me talk about
You're
this a
more
minute.
mainstream.
And Louis alluded to it. There are two groups, at least there were two groups. So Norman Lear, the creator of All in the Family, is all about the use of media for social change. He supports a lot of initiatives. So one he supports is UCLA has a school, 501(c) called Hollywood Health and Society. And some of what they do was born out of the CDC back in the 80s with AIDS, where if you're the CDC and you're trying to educate back then 250 million Americans, where do you go? You go to pop culture, film, and TV. So there's an institution in LA called Hollywood Health and Society, and they focus on exactly this issue. If it's cyberbullying, if it's obesity, and they've just started to talk about climate. And what they do is they liaise with the entertainment industry, the feature folks. They do tours, they do lectures, they bring the science community together with the entertainment community to entertain them on social issues. They pick 2 to 3 a year, and they're very rigorous. They look at the quantitative data, so they'll look at persuasion from a 30-second TV spot or a public service announcement versus writing into storyline, which is exactly what you're talking about. You know, Amy, this is the kind of stuff where I would recommend for this institution, this body, this community, as ideas like this come up, we capture them and we feed them out to the community, right? So
And make
this
them
should
happen.
Exactly. What other questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Right here.
Hi, Heidi Bynum. I've lived here a long time. So I don't know how to phrase the question, so I'm just going to put out the words subliminal messaging.
What was that?
Subliminal messaging. Yeah, why don't you, I mean, I think I know what you mean. So did you mean that as a negative or a positive? Okay.
Well, I mean, we're always looking for symbols in our films, and I would say it is subliminal, but it's also stated. I mean, in Game Changers, it's the black population that's targeted to for like a lot of the crap in the neighborhoods. They have these food deserts, and they're selling them non-nutritious food. So in our film, we have probably 40-50% of the characters are weighted towards, male black people. And, we wanted to weight it towards women, or, just we're using aspirational characters from a wide demographic. Jackie Chan is an executive producer, and put him up on the first title card. Just so those are all subliminal messages. These are targeted, like, oh, this is somebody I can identify with. This is an athlete I can identify with. And so we used a wide demographic of athletes and people of race and color.
I think most good storytelling is subliminal by nature. If you're talking about climate change, for example, Interstellar is a great subliminal climate change movie. Beasts of the Southern Wild, same thing. Whereas a movie like The Day After Tomorrow, or The Day After, I think it's called, which is a movie about climate change, isn't so subliminal, and I think is probably a little less effective.
They say a good documentary tells, a great one shows, and I think that sort of speaks to your question there.
And from where I sit, I always go back to the economics of advertising and marketing. And so Mark Pritchard at P&G launched a campaign 2 years ago in partnership with ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. And it was called See Her. And it was 80 brands, a coalition of 80 Fortune 500 brands, committing to positive representation of women and girls in their advertising. So that's subliminal, right? How you cast, the presence of cigarettes or not in an ad is all subliminal. But I'm hopeful that as we move forward, brands that have all this muscle and this media can use subliminal messaging to make this a better world.